Hey guys, this is Nowhere Man and Del Crosby, and we are here with episode 5 of Deuce Island. And I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. We've got four tables, 50-cent dollar here, so we're going to get into it.
You'll notice there's no reads on any of the players yet. We just sat down to all of our tables, so it's somewhat difficult to, know what's going on. Um, in general, when I start like this, I'm taking a more conservative approach, but that might not be how you like to play things. I'm usually either going to be somewhat conservative or really splashy. So
I may have gone the splashy. Well, I don't really go the splashy route pre-flop, but post-flop maybe.
right.
Um, so we're going to talk about this top left-hand table in just a second. So we have our friend Anaconda 8U2, and he calls flop bet. So I decided to check the turn, and I'm not super happy about it. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on betting the turn versus betting the river, which is what I end up doing.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a close spot. It doesn't really matter a ton because if we think about his peeling range on the flop, it's going to be hands like kings or
Yeah.
six, seven, eight type hands, maybe
Hmm.
jacks, maybe tens, maybe queens. But I think that
Probably.
yeah, I mean mostly here, we're going to be looking at a lot of six, seven, eight type hands, given that we have a king in our hand.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then we should be somewhat inclined to bet the turn. And the other thing is, I don't think that a 80, I guess we don't really have much of a read on him. But given that this
Nah.
guy is a short stacked player, we can somewhat assume that he's going to be more passive and a little less likely to decide to semi bluff the turn. So I feel like we can
Yeah.
bet fold the turn and not feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Whereas if we check back the turn, we will misvalue all those times that he has, he's just going to be able to check fold the river when he has a six, seven, eight type hand.
Right.
So betting the turn, I think, ends up being better overall if we think that he's not really bluff raising this dry of a board, especially since
Yeah.
it's entirely possible we can have a nine here. I think it's fine. So
Right. Yeah. I agree, and I think bet folding is fine on the turn. I'd be really surprised if this guy came over the top with, like, oh look, I have six, seven, eight in clubs, so now I'm gonna semi bluff. Like, that guy, this guy. I mean, yeah, I only have six hands on him, but I don't really think he's capable of that sort of thing.
mhm. The bottom right table ends up being interesting.
Yeah.
We call with like our wrap on a two-tone board. The turn is sort of a weird spot because
Yeah.
if I would just check call the turn, in all honesty. Because if we get bet, if
I
we
forget. Do I check raise the
no,
turn?
it checks through.
Oh yeah.
So
Okay.
we end up in an interesting spot either way. So I would probably be inclined to check call the turn if I were to try and just like make a play there. I think that it's a little
Yeah.
deep to want to check raise.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the big thing.
I could even see an argument for leading. But because stack sizes are really deep, when we get flatted, it is a pretty awkward river spot. So check calling here is fine. And then I think that once the turn checks through, I don't think that we can get value from any two pair type hand that he will have here. It just doesn't. It's just not a good board to try and bluff. Like even if we had a missed flush draw here, it's very possible that we could have made a straight at some point.
Right.
So, given that, I would just check the turn, or I would just check back or check the river to him and see if I can get him to bluff. Um, I don't think that there's much value in anything else here.
Yeah.
I think that even, we might be able to get a bet out of Queen Nine, but that would probably be it. Betting into him here, I don't really think that we're going to get called by worse ever. He's probably not going to bluff raise us, just because it's not a good board for that. So, you know, I would just
Yeah.
I would probably check call. You end up betting, and I think that
Yeah.
it's not. I mean,
I
it's not a
tot
big mistake, but
I definitely agree though that I think checking the river is better. As soon as I made the bet, I was like, wait, why did I do that again? And yeah, that was dumb.
yeah.
And I agree with your thoughts on the turn. And I was definitely check calling, and I actually think leading might in the end be better because if we check call the turn, I mean, the SPR isn't any different, obviously, between check calling and then betting and having him call. And we get the extra benefit of possibly getting it in if he wants to raise the turn. Because I'm not, obviously not against getting it in on the turn.
Yeah, well,
Um,
it's kind of a weird spot because if we get it on the turn, we're risking 90,
I mean,
putting in $93 into a pot that has 13 in it. And so, where I think that we're going to be getting free roll a lot. So,
it
I
won't
think
be
that
that big of a free roll, though, will it? Even if we are, I mean, I think we're going to be in against like a lot of two pair and flush draw hands more than we're going to be up against, like straight, like nut straight plus flush draw
I feel
hands.
like if he has any sort of two pair type hand, he's probably just gonna like any sort of two pair and a redraw, he's probably just gonna call the turn because he has the equity to do so. And so we're not, we don't really put him in a tough spot. I think that in his spot he's probably just gonna raise hands that have the like that will have like either, are the same as ours or are some sort of free roll against us. Um,
You don't think he raises with anything less than ace queen on the turn?
I mean, on this kind of board, well, I mean, the only other hand that he might want to raise here would be if he had some sort of like double flush draw, and even then
Sure. Okay.
he's gonna have like 40% equity versus
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
and a lot of those double flush draw type hands are going to have a gut shot
Something to go with it.
very
Sure.
often. Yeah, so
Yeah.
our equity there, not actually that great if you consider like his whole range. Like we're putting in a lot of money to protect a very small pot. There's only 13 blinds in the pot at this point. Um,
I guess my point is more that not necessarily that I'm super super excited about getting it in, but I don't think the river changes a ton if we bet versus check calling, as especially because I think he can check this board back a fair amount
mhm.
with, marginal stuff that he doesn't want to get check raised with or something like that.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
we'll see. I mean, I think that my play would be different depending on how the turn plays out. If the turn,
well, okay.
if we lead the turn, or if if he bet, so let's say we check call the turn, I'm going to lead all brick rivers there just because now our hand looks more drawy. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas if we lead the turn and get raised, we obviously just want to get it in at that point, but we're not in
Yeah.
great shape. Um, I mean we're in okay shape, but we can't really our hand looks somewhat if we lead this turn, our hand looks somewhat transparent. So it's sort of a weird spot when there's not that much in the pot to be putting in a lot of money with a very vulnerable hand. That's especially when it's vulnerable to either being to either chopping the pot or getting free rolled. So I think that all options are viable, and given this particular stacked pot ratio here, I think that I prefer just checking the turn and possibly letting it check through, and then maybe bluff catching some rivers depending on how it goes down. So
Yeah. Well, I do definitely agree that check calling the river is better,
yeah,
um,
the
which is not what I end up doing.
right. Yeah, the turn play it's very it's a very precarious spot, obviously. And that's why playing out of position sucks.
Yeah.
So I think that
Hey,
that's a fine call. I noticed you were kind of
yeah, I was
hesitating.
thinking about it.
Um,
Double suited jacks, I'm sure it's fine. If I had crappier jacks, I might consider it.
right.
I want to point out top right hand table. I'm calling because of the guy that the limper. I want to keep him in the pot.
On the top right, uh,
Yeah, the ace king queen six. I would normally
three bet
three
that.
bet
Yeah.
that
Now,
hand, but there was
who did you want to keep in the pot though?
Frankenstein's the guy
Oh,
who's
oh, okay.
limmed five of the six hands that he's played thus far and limmed under the gun in this hand.
Right. Yeah, I think that
And
that's
of course,
reasonable.
seeing this flop, I obviously made the right decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Baza 61 seems like he's got like pretty taggish stats, and so I don't,
Yeah.
there's going to be more value in playing a pot out of position three ways with Frankenstein's
Right.
instead of playing a pot heads up with Bazas, just because. And the important thing to consider there is that we have a hand that is nutted in, every direction. It only makes nut straights, nut flushes, and,
Right.
nut two pair. So I think that that's a perfectly reasonable hand to want to flatten that spot to let in the weaker players. So
I contemplated three betting that hand on the bottom of my hand too. He doesn't have the stack size for it. And Kevin almost just died, but didn't quite die.
yeah. This is a kind of interesting spot when we get donked into on this turn. Um, on the
I checked.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I check raised the turn.
Yeah. So you led the flop and then check raised the turn.
Yeah, I raised pre-flop and he called and then bet the flop and then check raised the turn.
Okay. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I think that
I was torn here
yeah,
again.
the thing is like we're not really that concerned. This is such a dry board that I don't know that he's going to be, if he has a hand like kings or aces or even, queens, I think that he can potentially peel another street here and then maybe make some sort of like river decision. But that said, if he's not going to call a river bet, are we doing ourselves a favor by letting him put in a turn bet and then just making him fold out his equity? Um, I think that he probably just doesn't have much on this board anyway. I expect him to be floating here a lot. So,
Right.
I guess that I don't mind check raising the turn, but I would much rather do it for a much smaller amount. That way, in the future when we're playing out of position against this guy, we can check raise the turn small with a bluff
Hmm.
and represent, and we can also, if he knows that we can like do that with a bluff or the nuts when we make like a smallish turn check raise, I think that that ends up working out better in terms of long-term expectation and in terms of just the fact that he can't really have any hand that's going to call this check raise. Even, I just don't see him, it's going to take a multi-component hand to be able to call
Right.
a check raise here, like something like
Or
nine.
Jack 8 or something, which is really tough to have.
Yeah, I mean, if he has a set, it doesn't matter. You guys are going to get it in regardless.
Yeah.
He's going to bet three bet any set, and he might even bet three bet Jack 8 if he has it. But against a lot of those like weaker hands, like I would rather just sort of check raise small since I don't, this is the kind of board that I am going to be messing with people a lot on. I will check raise a turn like this pretty often. And, people are going to I expect people to make decent mistakes here. But in general, like if the stacked pot ratio is such that I can just, I can get it in on the river somewhat like not regardless of what my check raise size is, but I can make a smaller check raise and still get it in with like a, not too much behind on the river.
Yeah, which you can.
Yeah. So I would probably check raise to like 30 here. And
The other thing about check raising small here that I think that makes it a decent time to do this is that I can't check raise mostly all in here,
yeah,
Like I still have
about half a
yeah, I have 50 big blinds left behind, even though I check raise to pot. So,
stack.
if I have the option to check raise all in here, like, okay, that's fine. But since I'm not even close to doing that in this spot, that seems like, if you're looking for a time to do something smaller and have a good reason to do it, like, this is probably it.
Mhm.
So you can do some different things here and then, make some different river plays because, I mean, even if he calls this check raise and several river cards come down, I'm not really that excited about it, and I have 50 BBs behind.
Yeah.
So if I make it 30 and he calls, and I've got then there's like pot size bet left, maybe a little bit more,
Mhm.
which doesn't necessarily make my decision any easier, but as far as like working on other future plays against him or just having that be part of my game, I think that's still useful.
We just need to consider like how many reasonable hands will he have that he backs into here. And if we check raise here and he does have a hand like the nut flush draw and maybe a gut shot, he can call there fairly profitably if he thinks that, he doesn't like that we're never going to fold the river. He'll have
Yeah.
about 25% equity versus top set. And, he's going to definitely have implied odds. And the other thing is it doesn't, when we make a check raise that large, we can't ever induce an aggressive player to make a light three bet all in just because we look like we don't have much.
Yeah.
So, I like to give them, I like to give people room to think they have fold equity when they don't. Because, and like I said, sometimes they will have fold equity there if I'm check raising an airball, which I will certainly do. But in spots like this, it's just not, when we check raise so large, like we can't fold anymore. We've committed ourselves with any draw we might have. And at the same time, if he has I think that he's gonna be able to like recognize that he should only be continuing with some sort of nutted draw there that doesn't have any reverse implied odds on his part if he makes his hand. So I would really only expect him to come along with nutted, like a nut flush draw plus some sort of big, plus some sort of
Some
gut
other
shot
thing.
or some other thing to give him extra equity to make it not such a transparent call. So
I do think though that maybe once in a great while we can get him to come in with like, I don't know, uh, if he's kind of crazy, we can get him to come along with like aces on a gutter or something like that, being like, oh, he had just picked up a draw and is check raising it now, that sort of thing. That is
yeah,
one other small benefit of check raising big there is that our hand looks more drawy on that board by check raising huge than it does by check raising small.
yeah, um, yeah. I
So
suppose. I mean, you're trying to get a lighter call out of. So like the argument for that is that we're trying to get a lighter call out of his bluff catchers. But I mean, even then, it's kind of difficult because we're basically only targeting like the overpair part of his range, given that we have top set. So I think that in order to call a check raise there, I think that a check raise folds out a lot of like aces type hands, like one, one pair
probably,
is
yeah.
probably gonna have to just give up there. So if we had something like a set of eights on the turn, I would actually like that a bit more because then it puts in a lot more combos of ways that he can have jacks up. It puts in a lot of
Sure,
ways to have jacks
Jack
up.
Deuce, yeah, yeah,
And it would make him more likely to want to continue there. But given that
yeah,
we sort of have like we sort of have his bluff catching range crushed, if that makes sense. In that
and
like
blocked.
yeah, I get or blocked is what I mean. We have his bluff catching range blocked. So we're not, I think it's going to be difficult to continue on in that spot. So anyway,
Yeah, so bottom left-hand table, I call queens on the button. I check back this flop three ways. I basically decided here that, you know, I probably have the best hand. Uh, I don't really see a lot of value in betting the flop, and I think I can just call turn and see what happens on the river here.
yeah, I agree.
Um, that's pretty much all there is to it.
Um,
So,
yeah, and a lot of guys aren't betting kings and aces here twice, and they're just gonna fire an air ball once and hope you
right,
give up.
and then, yeah, which is what I was expecting him to do. But then when he bets again, I'm like, my queens aren't good here. That's
Yeah.
fine.
And I think that it's reasonable for him to have turned a hand like 8, 9, 10 on the turn.
Sure.
So to turn some sort of rapish type hand, and so when he bets that river, I think we can give up. We just don't beat enough of his range anymore.
Yeah. This guy on the top right-hand table, Manjun, ends up being fun.
Yeah, we get into some spots with him that I would like
Yeah.
to
Ugh.
discuss. This hand ends up being kind of interesting.
I don't remember this hand at all. Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so we,
Ugh.
we turn it, we flop a gutter and we see bet this dry board.
Yeah.
Um, I
Pretty
think
standard.
that this is a pretty good card to just check back on, just because it's going to be kind of difficult to move him off of a king,
Yeah.
given how dry the board is. We don't know anything about him, and it's sort of it's a weird spot for sure. But with the pair now, I kind of want to see if I can, I think that if we make two pair here, a lot of our two pair outs are good. And we can potentially bluff some cards. Well, I guess we don't really have that many cards that we can bluff on the river, but
Yeah.
still, I think that we're in a weird spot, and his stack size is such that we're not, it's gonna be it's gonna be difficult when we get to the river to sort of make a play against his stack. So I would probably check back the turn there
I
mostly and
I mean,
evaluate
I
the
think
rivers.
I think the big things are, the majority of his range for calling this flop is a king inside cards or some draw that meshes with 2-5.
Right,
So the three hits the draw part of his range, and if he has a king, he's probably not folding to a double barrel.
right.
So that pretty much, I think, is all we need to say about the turn here. Like if he had, maybe if he had more of a stack, or if the turn came such that there were more river combinations that I could bluff him off of, to get him to fold one pair,
Hmm.
I think that would be okay. But here I just don't have enough fold equity
Yeah,
is really what it comes down to.
yeah, I'd agree.
And I think this is more, I think I bet the turn mostly because I was like, well, I don't really have any other way of winning the hand.
Hmm.
But I think that is sort of you need to balance that mentality with, yeah, okay, but you also can't win every pot.
Well,
And this just might be a spot where I can't get him to fold enough stuff. So we just got to see what happens.
and the thing is, we can win this pot, I think. If he really just has a king and side cards, sometimes we can make two pair and be good here. We have a
Sure.
gutter, and we can potentially bluff diamonds. Against an unknown, I wouldn't. And then as the video went
Yeah,
on, I definitely wouldn't
I
against this
definitely
guy.
wouldn't.
But I think that we can get ahead here, and we're not, we don't really have enough fold equity. So I would prefer to check back the turn. Um, so yeah, we
And then
can
when he
just
snap pot raises us, I also agree.
yeah, it's
Uh,
easy fold.
so I contemplated three betting the top left hand table. If Johan folds, I definitely three bet here.
Yeah.
If Johan has a full stack, would you three bet here ever?
Uh, Usually this is like such a borderline double paired hand to do it with, but
Yeah, because I have nothing to go with it.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't fold, but I can occasionally play like a I don't know like a very passive bottom set or middle set,
Yeah,
depending
bless you.
on how the board comes out. I probably wouldn't fold. I don't, because of his stack size, I probably wouldn't three bet. And against the full stack there, I think it's a definite three bet. But in this particular spot, I would, I'm usually okay with just sort of seeing a flop and seeing what kind of action goes in, and then like deciding from there. Folding pre-flop isn't even terrible,
Yeah, that's what I
but
end up doing. I think on the button it's probably a call. Anywhere else, I think it's definitely a fold three bet situation.
Mhm. um,
And then got the double suited queens.
I think that this hand it's not a terrible spot to go for to three bet there. Their hand is just so strong.
Yeah,
But we do have that limper in the pot who I think that we probably have a better chance of winning his stack if he, but it depends on
hmm
if we see him like capable of doming three bets, which some people do, some people don't. I probably would have three bet this. I don't think it's that important either way. And on this dry of a board, I think that calling here is best. We're not, if we raise, I think that he's going to fold basically his entire range. Like there's
yeah.
no hand that he's going to have that's going to call here.
And I want to keep the other guy in the pot anyway.
Right. And the turn sucks obviously, but
Yes.
it's not it's only sucks in that it's an action killer and now he's going to shut
Yeah.
down with his bluffs. And we have to
I
assume
think I
that,
even say that in the chat. Like it's a bad card because it hits my range more than it hits his range.
right. And he's just going to shut down with a lot of his bluffs. It's not actually that scary of a card because it requires us to have something specifically like 4, 5, 7. But if you have like a complete airball, it's going to make you shut down a lot here, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
he probably didn't pick up any equity. He's probably just going to have to sort of shut it down at this point. So, obviously we were going to bet the turn though because we can't really, if he has some sort of flush draw, he might check call. And so we can pretty easily get in a bet here.
Yeah.
So,
I think despite the stuff that we said about, action killer and it's bad because it hits my range and all that kind of stuff, the point still needs to be made that we do have to bet there.
yeah, you can't check and give a free card to his like 6 high flush draw.
Yeah.
And then, he probably doesn't have that, but if he has like any kind of flush draw there, which is pretty reasonable hand to just check if he turned like some sort of equity and then decide. But we still have to bet. There's no value in slow playing in a spot like that. Because we
Yeah.
can
There's
only
plenty
put
of
ourselves
stack
in
left to
weird
win.
spots. Yeah, we can only put ourselves in weird spots, and he's not going to have enough bluff catchers in his range when we have top set. He'd have to bluff catch with a hand like aces on the river when like,
Yeah.
it's just not, I mean, it's just not going to be a good spot for us. So, you do flop a lot of sets in this video.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah,
But they don't ever win, I think, is the problem that we find out.
right.
I think I was just trying to figure out what happened in this hand where he bets like a third of the pot on the river.
Yeah. So, um, yeah. So, in general, you didn't go through any sort of, you just loaded up the first four tables you could get sat at. You didn't bother to do any sort of table selecting.
No, there was. I switched the table. I sat at 5 tables and had one off on the side, and
Yeah.
switched one of them when I realized everyone at the table was playing like 19-13 or something like that. But other than that, I didn't really do any table selection. Honestly, I mean, I played this session at maybe 1 a.m. Eastern time. There were only 6 or 7 full stack 50-cent dollar tables anyway, so I didn't have a ton to choose from.
Right.
There were at least as many, if not more, shallow tables than there were
The shallow tables do
normal
tend
tables,
to
which is
run,
pretty standard.
yeah, they tend to run a lot.
Yeah.
They're good, they're profitable, but PLO is, the shorter stack you make PLO, the thinner the edges become. PLO
Yeah, and
is
more of an impact rake has too.
right. PLO is necessarily, people talk about like the huge edges in PLO, and that's a result of, players not like, not knowing how to play, but the shorter stack the game becomes, the thinner the edges become as a result of the
Yeah,
close equities. When people
'cause you don't
are
play as many streets.
right. Well, that, you don't play as many streets, and the money that does go in goes in with, maybe you're a 60% favorite or something.
Yeah,
You're not getting a big edge, whereas, if you're playing, if you like flop, as compared to when you flop like a pair and no limit, you usually have like a lot more equity versus your opponent.
right.
So yeah, that's why I like very deep PLO. You can put in quite a bit of money as a much bigger favorite. Uh,
Yeah, I don't think there was a single deep table that was running when I played this session.
yeah.
I think
I
I
thought
could.
that was a kind of nitty fold there,
Yeah, I
but
think it was too. If he has a full stack, I'd probably 3-bet there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I think I can call there in that spot because he's shorter stacked. So being out of position, isn't as big of a deal. I can get my money in quicker, that sort of thing.
hmm
Um,
This bottom right hand ends up being somewhat interesting.
yeah, yeah.
I was surprised at what he showed up with.
I was really surprised with what he showed up with. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. So I bet the flop, pretty standard. Turn, I basically, you can call this turning my hand into a bluff, I guess, but it's really just protecting the money that's in the pot. Like, I expect him to bet here, 98% of the time if I check, and I have the best hand a decent amount of the time, and I think he folds most non-flush hands here.
The
Um,
the other thing to consider is that on a board this draw heavy, if we give him a free card and we're unwilling to, like if we give a free card to a hand like 9 10,
yeah,
like
king
9
10,
10
whatever,
8
anything like
king
that.
10, like ace king 10, a
Yeah,
lot of those hands will can improve on the river, and then if we don't bet the turn, it's going to be kind of weird betting the river on one of those scare cards, and I think that we'll get looked
right.
up a lot by a straight. And so if we can make him fold out his equity there, I think it's way for the
Big,
best.
big. Yeah,
The
yeah,
other thing is if he calls, we're not, if he calls with like a low flush here, we're not doing badly.
right.
We do have, we have a gutter, essentially, and so it's fine, I think. Uh, you know, we, I don't, and I think that a lot of our range will be betting here. A lot, we're gonna have a flush there a reasonable amount of the time. I think that this is sort of a specific board texture that we would two barrel with our hand, where
Yeah,
we're not really happy to see him call, and so I think that we have to just check this river. I don't think we're getting him off a low flush if he called a turn. We would have to basically just
Right.
like, it becomes an expensive spot to bluff, and we don't even have reason to believe that he doesn't have the nut flush here.
Right,
Uh,
that's the other thing. Like he could just be calling in position with some monster hand being like, haha, I know he's gonna bet the river, you know.
right.
So I want no part of that. And I figure when he calls the turn, he has a flush here a ton.
Yeah.
So there's just not enough benefit for me betting here.
Right.
And then of course, he snap checks behind with two pair, and I'm like,
The
what,
same
three
hand.
pair, I guess, but I'm like, what? So I don't know. What do you think of his play here?
Well, it depends on what he thinks of you. Because
I
if
mean,
he
given
thinks
that he
that
has
you're,
20 hands on me and I'm a
yeah,
nit,
yeah, given, if he thinks that you're very polarized here to only having like the nut to only betting the nut flush for value or an air ball for value,
yeah,
then that's not a bad hand to be calling with, just because it's sort of like the bottom of his like bluff catching range, or like it's the top of his bluff catching range, and it takes away a lot of hands that, a lot of the hands that you might, I don't know. I guess it's just weird because if he thinks that you could bet twice with a set there, he obviously has to fold. If he thinks that you're
right.
only, it's thin. I don't think it's a great play to make without a read. You
Yeah,
know,
which he doesn't have. I mean, he has no read on me basically.
right? And I mean, it's sort of, it's sort of the same. It's not a terrible call, but if we are capable of three barreling here, like if we had like a higher heart, like if I had the ace of hearts or the king of hearts, I might bet the river as well. And then I put him in a really weird spot where he has no idea, he can't really do much. The thing about his hand is he has no sort of card removal effect where he can figure out what you might have.
Yeah.
And so it's not that great a spot, but I guess he was just calling thinking he has, six outs to try and boat up and maybe get, your stack, or, at least get another bet on the river. I don't think it's a very good play overall.
Well, and the
But
other thing is now, and I didn't take this note obviously in game, but now I think, were this situation to come up again, I would triple barrel him
right,
because now that I see if this type of hand is in his range, then I definitely think he can call the turn with any set. Like, I think if I bet the river, I can get him to fold any hand that's not a flush.
mhm,
And seeing this hand makes me think that there are way more combos of non-flush hands in his range when
right,
we get there.
right. Yeah, I think that that's fine, and that's an adjustment that I would definitely be making, given the way we saw him play that hand.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. My computer decided to totally freak out for a minute. We are back in action. Uh, so like I said, raised ace king 10-5, no big deal, especially because you got a couple of nits behind me. There's plenty of nut potential with that hand that were cool.
Yeah. Um, so something that we should sort of notice developing is Manjin is playing 80-40 so far. It's only over 10 hands, but
Yeah.
10 hands is still a decent amount. By the way, this is like the loosest open under the gun I think I've ever seen you make, on the bottom left table. Um,
I got a pair of tens and a nut suit. That seems plenty for me. I mean, it's the like three cardiest hand that has ever been a three card hand, but you know,
yeah, I would not. I would say that it is ill-advised to open a hand like that.
it
Um,
probably is.
Also on the bottom right table, I
Yeah,
so
this is
we're
fun.
kind of going in from bad spot to bad spot here.
Yeah.
A hand like this. So if we three bet, like, sorry.
But it's a fun three bet. Come on.
Well, if we three bet here, we can get in, 10 and something. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think our
It's
three
like
bet would be
11 or 12. That's all. Not very much.
right, and it puts us. So we probably have fold equity against PokerBot in terms of whether or not he's going to call here. Um, the dream situation is we could just get all in pre-flop without true champion, but most likely Baza's going to call, and we're going to play a spot where our hand range looks kind of a lot like what our hand is, which is
Yep.
never good.
Right.
And we're playing out of position against who's, I think that he seems like a good player so far.
I mean, yeah. I'm sure he's decent enough for 50 cent dollar. Yeah.
Right. So given all of that, and we don't, our hand doesn't actually flop that well,
Yeah,
a lot of the time. I would probably just flat here.
yeah,
Um,
I
we end
agree.
up
I three
making
bet
a
tiny because
yeah.
basically my thought process here was one, it'd be fun and it'd be cool to see on video, and we could talk about it. Two, seriously, that was most of why I did it because most of the time I think I call here. But the thing I wanted to experiment with here is, I build, and I didn't think that much about the size that I made it to. But I build a different sized pot here, and I can see some other types of hands that I would do this with other than just aces. And honestly, if like a true champion puts me on only aces, like that's fine because he doesn't have a whole stack. But if I can get Baza to think that I can have like big rundowns or like Broadway card hands here, I think that's enough deception where I'm cool. And what I end up doing is building like a $25 pot so if I do happen to flop like a set or an overpair with a nut flush draw, it's really easy for me to get all my money in. Whereas if the pot is like $8 on the flop, it's going to be a lot tougher for me to do that sort of thing.
See,
That's the thought process behind it. I am definitely not saying that that's like the best way to play this hand by any means.
the thing is, when we have, we make this bet, but then we end up with, about 4.5, or, 4 and change X pot left.
Yeah, it ends
And
up
it's
being four.
not, yeah, it's not easy to get stacks in here in all, we have to basically pot and then have someone pot raise.
Well,
If
or just
we
bet the flop and bet the turn.
Right. But,
Because I mean, if
how
I
many hands can, when we flop top set, like what kind of board texture are we going to get where someone's going to be able to go with a hand like that quickly?
Well,
It's
but
not,
that's the thing. I think if you have an SPR of, I mean, an SPR of four, this is like a pretty standard, just normal run of the mill three bet pot if it was just heads up. So
right.
I think a lot of people can get married to hands a lot more quickly in that sort of situation. Because I mean, it only takes two bets to get all in at this point. It's
Yeah.
not like we're getting bet raise three bet to go all in or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in order to get, I think that if we make a big, a big move at any pot that's four ways, it's just going to look very strong. And so in a situation like this, I think that the thought here is that we're trying to build a pot so that we can force people to go with hands that are more towards the middle part of their range as opposed to the upper part of their range. We can expand their stack off ranges by making a bigger pot. But in reality, when you have a four-handed pot, I just don't think that people are going to stack off that wide because if we put a lot of heat on the pot, our range is going to look very nutted.
Yeah.
Whereas if we just flat, I think that we get a little, we have a better chance of, maybe putting in a lot of money good. Um, and the other thing is if we flat and the pot is like $8, if we bet the flop and we get like like two calls, we're gonna have a bloated pot immediately.
Yeah.
Whereas, as on a pot, when the pot is this big, it's difficult to get a loose peel from someone on any sort of flop texture because the pot is going to be very big and they're not, it's going to be a lot more money for them to call some sort of continuation bet. Because now if we bet 15 into 25, it becomes a tougher choice for someone who has like maybe a gutter and a flush draw, as compared to when the pot is smaller.
Maybe.
I mean, it depends on who the action is on
I
and
mean,
what kind of.
I think the other issue is the other people that are in the pot. These guys are not like PokerBot and Baza are not the kind of people to make extra loose peels in large pots with marginal hands. That's really the key for me. Like if Manjan is in this pot and the guys on like I think this is a much neater idea on the top right hand table than on the bottom right hand table where I could get, Manjan to call an $18 bet on this flop with like a king,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah,
Whereas here, yeah, PokerBot's not continuing on this board with like anything less than, I don't know, two pair plus a queen or something like that.
mhm,
So yeah, like I said, I did it to have fun. And
right.
I obviously see the greatest flop in the world, so uh, we're not really going anywhere at this point.
Mhm.
Although
I don't hate
I do have two blockers to the nut straight. I could bet here.
I don't hate just betting out in all
Yeah.
honesty.
But then I get like the fastest pot size bet in the history of the world. So I'm like, oh, okay, he's got ace queen. I can fold.
Yeah, I think that he'll either have ace queen, or he'll have a set here and just think that he's just
Yeah.
gonna go with it. Um, given that he min raised under the gun, like him having kings or kings wouldn't surprise me. But I think that we obviously have to give up here.
Yeah.
So
And check it out. We have Yoda on the top right-hand table commenting in the chat about our position in the last hand. And then
oh, was that about you?
I wasn't about
I
me. It's about the other guy, Manjin, I think.
oh yeah.
And hey, look at that. I
Um,
flopped a set and then another set or quads, which I'm like, okay, now. So this is a fun spot because I mean, what?
they can't have anything.
I
Like
even have a two blocked.
you have a two block, you have aces blocked, you have everything blocked. I think that checking is fine. Like there's just no hand. This is the driest board in the
Yeah,
history of the world.
like the
Um,
if there was ever a bad spot to have a spot, I think this is it. Because I mean, no one's ever gonna pay me a cent on this board ever.
you're never getting a dime.
Oh, this hand makes me so sad.
Yeah, you time out.
Ugh.
That pot. So I mean, I think that this is a pretty standard check jam here.
Yeah.
With the Even though it's a flush board, we have the mega wrap here.
Yes.
And his range, he's playing 83-42
He
with a
can bet fold
20%
here.
reset. Yeah, and he's been bet folding a decent amount.
Right.
So
And that was I missed this. Like looking at it again, I've seen that he's done that and I kind of missed it in session. And while I was looking at being like, holy crap, I have quads in the bottom left-hand table. Um, I was not my thought process on the top right-hand table was I was thinking about um calling the flop versus jamming the flop, thinking that maybe I can possibly get away from my hand on a club turn if I want to, and he'll never fold anyway if I get there, so I can sort of save some money the times that a really bad turn card comes. But I think the fact that he's been able to bet fold at least once or twice already in this session means that I can get my money in really good even now.
Mhm.
So the fact that I can get my money in good now and I might be able to get him to fold means that I should just jam now. If I were in position, I think it would be a different story.
Right. So now we pick up another turn card that just doesn't help at
Yeah,
all.
I'm like, oh great, I have the nut flush draw.
I would I
I
would
should just check
probably
again.
just check again. I
Yeah,
mean,
in a five-way pot, I think I should just check again.
I would hope that someone has a six and maybe they can catch another six and pay you off. Like the number of hands that or maybe they'll make like a queen high flush and crying call the river. But I
Yeah.
don't even think a queen high flush draw isn't going to call the turn. Um,
No. No.
so I mean maybe you could bet maybe you could just do that sort
In
of
bet.
noobish play where you just bet $1
Yeah.
and then $1 and then $1 and then
Yeah, someone
like
would get some pretty good notes on me then.
well you'd probably get a player like me to like spaz jam over the top of you.
You
Um,
can't have you can have quads here. Oh yeah, that actually brings up that's what happens on the top right-hand table right here, isn't it? Or is that in a little while?
I think that comes up soon.
Somebody on the top right on the top left-hand table, Johan Min bets into me on the river, and I'm like, I could raise here, but I just want to see what you have.
Right.
Actually ends up being a pretty useful call too.
Yeah, I mean sometimes if someone's gonna like basically offer you, 20 to 1 to with ace high to see their hand, it's not the
Yeah.
worst thing in the world. Just to see how they played a hand. Because people are gonna they might see that you made that call, but they're not gonna think like, oh man, like he made that call for information so
Right.
that now he knows how I'm gonna play my hand. He's gonna think, oh, look at this donkey, he paid me off with ace high.
Yeah.
It's just
Which I mean isn't necessarily inaccurate, but there may be another reason too.
right. Um, and then here on the top or on the bottom right, since we're never we're bet calling here obviously
Oh
once
yeah.
we turn the flush draw. I would just pot it. I mean I don't. The thing is we don't actually want him to call with like an ace or a
Yeah.
jack here. So I think
But
that
he's
just
I mean he's going to anyway.
he might fold one pair here. I think that he could easily fold a jack if we pot it, for example. We just don't want to get him to stick it in here. We want him to fold.
Yeah,
And if he does call, it's not the worst thing in the world because we have
we
two
have
pair
plenty of
and
we're probably ahead and have equity and redraws if we need them or whatever.
right. But we do just want him to fold here, so I
Yeah,
would just potting it and not worry about it. And I'd do that if I had like just some sort of if I had like no pair there, I'd probably pot it too, and then just check fold a river if I missed.
mm-hmm.
But in that
Be really
particular,
sad if he jams the last $6.
yeah, I mean, but king
Whatever.
hot, if I had like king queen 10, I would just make my my best effort to move him off of the hand then.
Yeah.
Since if he calls, he's not folding the river usually. Um, and if he was willing to fold the river, it's even possible that we could have the best hand with king high.
Yeah, maybe.
So, um,
This is a fun flop spot here. I decided to bet. I thought about checking, but
I think
I
that
based,
it's
you know,
yeah, with the 5, I think that it's fine.
I also
You know,
think both of these guys are really loose and really passive, which was what made me lean more towards just betting myself because I think I can get calls from them,
right.
and I'm not gonna get raised a lot, but haha, I get min raised.
Yeah.
So
Um,
okay, he has
it's
5-3.
it's a shitty spot to be put in when, we haven't seen this guy get out of line yet though.
Right,
So I tend to give him credit. Like he might not have 3-5 here, but he might have like two pair. Or
right.
the worst case scenario is that he has a hand that has decent equity versus us. He
Like
has like
8-7-5 or something like that.
or like a 6 in kickers.
Sure.
Like we're still not doing great. I
Best
don't know
case,
that.
we have like 55, 58, 60% equity, and we're going to be out of position, and he's going to jam a ton of turn cards for a pot size bet, and I'm going to be like, now what do I do?
Yeah, I think that if he had like kings here, he'd probably just check call.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So or just call as it were. So
Yeah.
I don't think that folding here is terrible. Um, it's gonna be. I think that we're not doing great against his range.
No, and
Uh,
I think more than not doing well against his range now, the turn is going to be really, really hard to play well.
yeah, because even if we are ahead, it's going to be very hard to realize our equity on like a turn there.
Yeah.
So we get into a pretty weird spot, I think, on this bottom right table or bottom left table. Um,
Oh, is this where there's like the limp? Oh, yeah.
like he like snap limp re-raises, and I think
Yeah, I'm
that's
like,
just a
goodbye.
trivial fold with kings.
Goodbye. Even with the other column. If those guys are both like
Yeah,
deep,
they'd have to have like deep stacks behind.
yeah, then it's a totally different story.
And this guy like tries to slow play his obvious top boat.
Yeah.
Um, you know, this is just not much. The bottom right is
I was
sort of
gonna say, do you have anything that you want to say about that one?
yeah. I mean, we can just keep rolling, but it's sort of a spot where we need to balance if we want to try and let him fire a river as a bluff.
Right.
But it's reasonable that he can have like some equity here, and we're usually just better off making him fold and not hitting a king. Or,
Yeah.
if we had ace king queen queen, I'd just check it back and let him take a free card there and not feel bad about it. But in this particular spot, I think it's gross to let him in. Then we get into this really weird sort of flop spot. Well, it's not that weird, but
Yeah. So I should just for everyone, I 3-bet because he's only got like, he had a 35 big blind stack, and I'm happy to 3-bet him with kings and there. I
yeah,
would
because
normally
then it's
3-bet
gonna.
with these
I mean,
bad kings.
we get in about 30% of our stack, and so it's sort of like the same thing as playing like at this point in the stacked pot ratio. It's basically like playing, our really bad kings play the same as like our really bad aces almost.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't think that this guy has, he's probably not going to 4-bet jam with a hand that isn't aces.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this is fine.
And then Manjin cold calls immediately right behind me, which makes me not very happy until I flop top set.
Again,
Yeah.
kings have been pretty lucky for you this session.
Hmm.
So, the only question here is bet sizing.
Yeah.
I would either bet, half of DKP's stack, or pot it, trying to represent like a weak hand that doesn't want to get called, like aces here.
I think I should bet more than what I do.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
I
think I
would,
would bet less here. I would err on the side of betting more like 32 or something like
yeah,
that.
I mean, I would either pot it or I would bet such that, if DKP opts to go all in, he can. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right, right. I fold this hand here solely because Manjan's behind me. I think I would raise this from this spot normally, but
Yeah,
I don't
I
really want
wasn't.
to play that hand out of position against him.
Yeah, see, I would now that this guy has sort of established himself, I'm gonna start. This is where I start opening up my four betting game.
Well, okay, sure. I don't really want to four bet him with that hand though necessarily, do I?
I think that no, but I think that that's a good enough hand to play in a three bet pot because there's gonna be a lot
Yeah.
of flops that we can check jam
I
on.
mean, I
So
think
I'm
that's probably the
okay
better way
with
to do it.
because it's if three bets us there, we're gonna be heads up all the time. And
Right.
for example, let's say we get a Jack 4-7 flop with King Jack 10. What was it? King Jack 10-5 or something.
Or something
I
like that.
just Yeah, I would just check pot on this
Yeah,
flop
yeah,
and feel fine about it.
exactly.
Um, he's gonna get it in with all worst jacks. Probably a lot of middle pair type hands. Like we're gonna, we'll probably. I think that we can get it in as a 60, like as on the good side of a 60-40, a lot here.
Oh yeah.
So
Well, and
for
he
example,
folds.
what?
And he folds to the jam.
Yeah, a lot of the time. In this particular spot, he had, he picked up top. I think, we're still in good shape against that hand with two
Yeah.
overs, and some backdoors. So I don't know. I think that that's fine. Um,
All right. So I think we're gonna call it a session with that hand right there, and we will be back next week with most of the conclusion of this episode. So as always, if you guys have any comments, questions, whatever for us, feel free to leave them in the forums. And Kevin, last minute thoughts for this week?
nope. See you next week, guys.
All right, take it easy, guys.